Imagine for a second that you're looking at a report card. And, I mean, not just any report card, but an absolute masterpiece of an academic record.
Right, like straight A pluses across the board.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Straight A pluses. So you're looking at things like life expectancy, and it's outstanding. Public education, world class, crime rates. So remarkably low, you practically have to, like, squint to see them.
Yeah, it's the kind of record where if you were a parent, you'd be throwing a massive party for this kid.
For sure. But then you look over at the student who actually earned these grades, and they're packing their bags, they're looking for the nearest exit, and they are actively trying to drop out of the school entirely.
Which is such a crazy paradox when you put it like that.
It is. And the student in this scenario is the Netherlands. Because by 2025, emigration out of this seemingly perfect country is projected to hit an all-time high.
Yeah, a record number of people just saying, I'm out.
Right. So today, we are doing a deep dive into this exact paradox. And our insights today come from a really fascinating video essay by the YouTube channel Hindsight, and it's titled The Obvious Flaw in the Perfect Country.
It's a great source because it really gets into the mechanics of what's breaking down over there.
Totally. So our mission today is to unpack this. We're going to look at the structural, fatal flaw that's currently fracturing Dutch society, which is really a breakdown in the unwritten rules between the citizen and the state.
And why this serves as a massive warning sign for anyone, anywhere, trying to build a future in the modern world.
Exactly. So to understand why people are leaving this seemingly perfect country, we first kind of have to understand how that perfection was engineered in the first place, right?
Yeah, we have to rewind. Because to see how a highly engineered society like this begins to crack, you have to look at what the citizens were promised originally. And that takes us back to the late 1940s and the 1950s.
So right after World War II.
Right. The Netherlands, much like the rest of Europe, was just climbing out of the absolute ruins of the war. And they weren't just rebuilding physical infrastructure like bridges and ports.
Right, they had to rebuild the social fabric.
Exactly. They had to rebuild the very concept of trust between the government and a population that was deeply traumatized. And globally at this time, governments were actively pitching completely different visions of how a society should function, to prevent that kind of collapse from ever happening again.
Like the U.S. versus the Soviet bloc, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So in the United States, the social contract was heavily tilted toward the individual. The state promised freedom and a relatively free market, and it basically operated on the premise that if you were willing to work hard and take enormous risks, you earn the opportunity to strike it rich.
And you get to keep the rewards. So
Yeah.
It's very much high risk, high reward, with the individual acting as the primary engine of their own security.
Right. And then you look at the other extreme in Eastern Europe. The state there promised absolute cradle-to-grave security. They guaranteed jobs, they guaranteed housing, they controlled all the supply chains.
But with a pretty heavy price tag.
A massive price tag. The cost for that security was absolute loyalty and total subservience to the collective, pretty much at the total expense of individual liberty.
Right. So where did the Dutch land in all of this?
Well, under Prime Minister Willem Drees, they decided to engineer a completely unique middle path. Drees operated on this philosophy that a government's absolute first responsibility was establishing a baseline of undeniable security.
Meaning no one falls through the cracks.
Exactly. No citizen should be left to just completely fail if they get sick, lose their job, or simply grow old. I mean, he introduced a basic income for all elderly citizens, which at the time was revolutionary.
It sounds like a pure welfare state, but there's a catch, wasn't there? Because the individuals still had to hold up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, it wasn't a free ride. The state promised security and a stable economy, which was rooted in strict fiscal discipline, but the citizen had rigid obligations. You were expected to work, you were required to pay relatively high taxes, you had to take personal responsibility for your immediate community.
And above all, you had to follow the rules.
Yes, it was a highly structured, perfectly balanced, mutual agreement.
It makes me think of like a highly functioning roommate agreement.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, like it's not a passive landlord-tenant relationship where you just cut a check every month and ignore each other. It's an active mutual pact. Everyone knows exactly what chores they're assigned.
Right.
You take out the trash, you do the dishes, you pay the utilities on time. And in return, everyone gets to enjoy a perfectly clean, stress-free apartment where the fridge is just somehow always stocked. You do your part, and the system absorbs the chaos of the outside world.
That is exactly how it felt. And that roommate agreement actually experienced a massive, totally unforeseen upgrade in 1959.
Oh, right, the gas boom.
Yeah. Geologists discovered the Groningen gas field right under the northern part of the country. And we aren't just talking about a modest little natural resource here. This was one of the largest natural gas fields in the entire world.
Oh, wow. So just overnight, everything changes.
Pretty much. Almost overnight, the state had this enormous, seemingly endless influx of financial resources pouring right into the national treasury. I mean, this geological lottery ticket completely changed the math of that post-war social contract.
So keeping with the analogy, the roommates basically win the lottery and decide to upgrade the entire living situation. They move from a functional two-bedroom into like a massive luxury penthouse.
Exactly. And by 1973, under Prime Minister Jupp Daniel, the government decided this incredible new wealth needed to be aggressively shared across society.
So they just started spending it on the public.
Oh, heavily. The state poured billions into expanding public services, strengthening social safety nets, and funding incredibly ambitious land reclamation projects.
Literally building more land to live on.
Right. But the absolute centerpiece of this new, expanded luxury social contract was housing. If you look at the data from the source, back in 1950, the Netherlands was largely a nation of renters who were leasing from private landlords.
Okay, so mostly renting.
But you fast forward to the year 2000, and that dynamic had totally flipped. The vast majority of people owned their own homes, and the minority who were still renting were heavily subsidized in state-backed social housing.
I see. So homeownership essentially became the physical manifestation of the social contract.
Completely.
The government basically engineered a society where if you did your chores, paid your taxes, and worked a normal job, homeownership was your guaranteed engine for building generational wealth.
Yeah, it was your shelter, your retirement plan, and your proof that playing by the rules actually worked.
Honestly, anyone would sign up for that deal.
Yeah.
You get the security of the collective with the wealth-building upside of an individual asset.
Right, and the system operated flawlessly as long as there was enough physical space and enough natural gas revenue to lubricate the whole economy.
Which obviously couldn't last forever.
No, it couldn't. And a massive philosophical and economic shift occurred in the mid-1990s under Prime Minister Wim Kok. The country was riding a really strong economic boom, and the government wanted to lean even harder into this homeownership dream.
By doing what?
By effectively financializing it. They implemented policies to make mortgages significantly easier to obtain. They started deregulating lending standards right around the time that global interest rates were beginning a long, historic decline.
I see where this is going. Because when you flood a market with cheap debt, you inherently change the purchasing power of the buyer.
Exactly.
If money is cheap to borrow, buyers can afford to bid higher and higher on the exact same asset.
And that artificially inflated demand completely detached real home prices from economic reality. Home values began rising exponentially faster than actual wages.
So the asset gets disconnected from the labor.
Yes, and the psychological shift here is really critical to understand. A house was no longer just a stable shelter or, a modest retirement egg. It became a high-yield financial instrument.
Right.
If you already owned property in the 90s, you were suddenly accumulating massive amounts of wealth simply by sitting in your living room and watching your equity compound.
But if you were a young person trying to enter that market, the ladder was actively being pulled up and away from you by the very policies designed to promote ownership.
Exactly.
But wait, let me unpack this for a second. If the government is artificially pumping the demand side with easy, cheap mortgage money, the only way to prevent a total pricing collapse is to flood the supply side.
You would think so, yeah.
You have to build houses at a ferocious rate to absorb all that cheap capital, right? It sounds like they were playing musical chairs, but the government kept removing chairs while actively inviting more and more people to the party.
That is a perfect way to describe it. Which brings us to the tipping point in the 2010s under Prime Minister Mark Rutte. The macroeconomic environment created a deeply toxic recipe. Interest rates basically bottomed out, essentially hitting zero, making borrowing virtually free.
Right.
And at the same time, the population was growing steadily, heavily driven by necessary economic immigration to fill labor shortages. but housing construction severely, chronically lagged behind.
Why did they stop building, though? Did they just run out of land?
Well, it was a combination of things: incredibly strict zoning laws, intense environmental regulations, particularly regarding nitrogen emissions from construction, and just a general bureaucratic paralysis.
Okay.
They simply failed to build anywhere near the volume of homes required to meet the demand that they themselves had engineered. And the economic data from Root's tenure is just staggering. Real home prices surged by nearly 50%.
50%. That's insane.
Yeah, and meanwhile, real wages, meaning the actual purchasing power of a citizen's take-home pay after adjusting for inflation, actually decreased.
A 50% spike in the cost of the single most important asset in the social contract, while the currency you use to buy it is actively losing its power.
Exactly. It breaks the system.
That completely severs the bargain. I mean, if I put myself in the shoes of a young Dutch professional today, the psychological whiplash has to be devastating
Oh, for sure.
because they did everything they were supposed to do. They excelled in a world-class education system, they secured a good job, they pay some of the highest income taxes in Europe, they follow every law to the letter, they're performing every single obligation of that post-WWII blueprint.
Yet the reward for that compliance is mathematically out of reach now. And when a system breaks down this spectacularly, you get the current reality.
Right.
Polling data from the source indicates that 30% of young Dutch people are actively considering moving abroad, specifically because the housing market has locked them out of building a future.
30%. That is a huge chunk of the next generation.
It is, and 3% are actively searching for a way out right now.
Well, I mean, if the primary vehicle for wealth building is permanently locked, human beings naturally adapt. You can't just leave your surplus income sitting in a savings account earning zero interest while inflation just eats your purchasing power.
No, you can't. And this requires looking at the deep, historical relationship the Dutch have with financial discipline.
Oh, this is fascinating.
For centuries, this is a population that has survived in a highly unpredictable, hostile physical environment. When a significant portion of your country is literally below sea level, you are constantly fighting back the ocean just to keep your land dry.
Right. The stakes are existential.
Culturally, frugality and saving for a rainy day aren't just good habits there, they are survival mechanisms baked into the national DNA. You build dikes for the water, and you build financial reserves for your family.
Makes total sense.
Right
So
there.
the youth pivot. They take that ingrained cultural discipline. They realize the housing market is this fortress they can't breach, and they turn to the stock market.
Yes.
They start investing in equities to try and outpace inflation
Yeah.
and build some semblance of a retirement.
Exactly. They adapted to the environment the government created. And how did the government respond? By proposing a sweeping tax reform that specifically targeted those exact stock market investments.
Oh, boy.
And this wasn't just a standard capital gains tax that you pay when you sell an asset for a profit. The government proposed a 36% tax on unrealized gains.
Wait, hold on. Taxing unrealized gains?
Yes.
That means you haven't even cashed out the stock yet?
Nope.
Taxing unrealized gains at 6% creates a massive liquidity crisis for the average saver. Let's walk through the mechanics of that because it is wild.
Let's do it.
So if I buy a diversified index fund and my portfolio goes up on paper by 20,000 euros, I don't actually have that cash. That profit is entirely theoretical until I actually execute a trade and sell the stock.
Correct. But under this proposed reform highlighted in the source, the tax authority would view that 20,000 euro paper gain and assess a 36% tax liability on it.
You're kidding.
Nope. You would owe the government 7,200 euros in hard cash, just for the privilege of your portfolio appreciating in value.
I would literally be forced to sell off my own investments, shrinking my portfolio, triggering potential trading fees, just to scrape together the cash to pay a tax bill on phantom wealth.
Pretty much, yeah.
That totally defeats the mathematical magic of long-term compounding. It punishes the exact financial discipline the culture supposedly reveres.
It does. But to understand how a policy this aggressive even gets drafted, you have to look at the government's macroeconomic rationale.
Right, and just to be clear to the listener, we're not taking a political side here. We are just reporting on what the source material lays out about how both sides viewed this.
Exactly. We're just looking at the mechanics. And from the state's perspective, they recognized a structural shift in their own economy. A massive and increasing percentage of all new wealth generated in the Netherlands wasn't coming from labor or wages anymore.
It was coming from asset inflation.
Yes. Real estate portfolios and stock market holdings were just exploding in value, and the state relies on tax revenue to fund this incredibly expensive, world-class welfare state, the hospitals, the infrastructure, the elderly care.
Right, the things that make the report card so good.
Exactly. So from the government's perspective, if asset inflation is the primary engine of wealth, the state must tap into that engine to balance the national checkbook.
Okay, I completely understand the macroeconomist's view looking at a spreadsheet. The state has to go where the money is.
Right.
But applying that logic to a 25-year-old creates a profound ethical contradiction. The government's own monetary and zoning policies caused the asset inflation that priced the youth out of the housing market in the first place.
Yeah, that's a painful irony.
And when those same young people try to adapt and save in the stock market, the government tries to penalize them for surviving the economic conditions the state itself created.
And that intense friction between the state's need for revenue and the citizens' need for a viable future is exactly what turned a frustrating economic environment into a societal powder keg.
I can imagine.
The public backlash against this unrealized gains tax was so ferocious and so widespread across different demographics that the government was eventually forced to completely abandon the proposal.
Wow.
But the damage to the social contract was already done.
Because it wasn't just a bad policy, it was a revelation of the state's priorities. It signaled to the younger generation that playing by the rules, grinding at a salary job, and being a model citizen no longer guarantees upward mobility.
Right.
The state was willing to extract their meager wealth to maintain a system that heavily favors the older generation sitting on real estate equity.
And that crushing realization of betrayal is the structural breakdown driving the record emigration we're seeing.
So who is actually leaving?
Well, the people looking for the exit aren't a monolith. A significant portion of the raw volume consists of highly skilled foreign-born residents, immigrants and expats who move to the Netherlands for opportunity, experience the friction of this locked-up system, and are simply choosing to take their talents elsewhere.
Which makes sense. But what about the locals?
That's the real issue. The underlying symptom of a stalled society is the disillusionment of the Dutch-born youth.
Yeah, because the expats have a home country to return to. For the Dutch youth, this is their home. And they are actively deciding that the math of their own society is so broken, they have to leave their family and culture behind just to have a shot at a middle-class life.
Exactly. And it is crucial to note here that the government hasn't failed in its absolute basic duties.
Right.
The Netherlands still provides exceptional health care, the streets are remarkably safe, the transit works perfectly, the baseline security that Willem Drees envisioned after WWII is still intact.
But the upward mobility component, the promise that your labor will translate into equity, is just shattered.
Yes. And if the wealth-building engine is completely broken, you have to imagine the people staying are just the older demographic who already locked in their assets decades ago.
Right.
And when an economy operates that way, a powerful and dangerous economic principle takes over. The source points out that when a country's system heavily rewards simply sitting on a piece of land more than it rewards actual productivity, labor, and innovation, that society inevitably stagnates.
Because the money isn't moving.
Exactly. Capital gets trapped. Instead of money flowing into research, new businesses, or technological advancement, billions of euros are functionally frozen in unproductive assets like residential housing.
So how do you even fix that?
Well, the radical shift required to fix this, as analyzed by multiple economic observers in the video, involves completely decoupling housing from investment. Governments have to aggressively intervene to treat housing strictly as a basic utility, while simultaneously incentivizing citizens to invest their capital into the real economy.
Meaning businesses that actually produce goods, services, and wage growth.
Interesting.
This forces anyone listening to hold up a mirror to their own local economy. Because a housing market that operates like an exclusive country club isn't a uniquely Dutch phenomenon.
Not at all.
This exact dynamic, stagnant wages paired with astronomical asset inflation is playing out in major metropolitan areas across the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia.
It's everywhere.
It really is.
Yeah.
You have to look at the city you live in and ask, is the system actually rewarding your daily grind, your innovation, and your hustle? Or is it secretly just a mechanism to reward the people who were lucky enough to secure a mortgage 20 years ago?
It's a tough question to ask.
It is. Are you participating in a dynamic, forward-looking economy? Or are you just paying an exorbitant subscription fee to a class of people whose primary achievement was being born in an earlier decade?
Those are deeply uncomfortable questions, but avoiding them is exactly how a society accidentally engineers its own decline.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So we started today by examining a post-WWII utopian blueprint, a society painstakingly rebuilt on mutual trust, anchored by a massive natural gas boom, and brilliantly structured around homeownership as the ultimate reward for civic duty.
Right.
But we watched the mechanics of that system unravel. Decades of deregulated lending, rock-bottom interest rates, and a catastrophic failure to build new housing transformed a tool for security into a weapon of inequality.
Yeah.
And when the state attempted to tax the only remaining financial lifeline for the youth, they fractured the foundational trust of an entire generation, triggering a modern exodus from a country that looks perfect on paper.
Which leaves us with a much larger global implication to consider, really.
What's that?
Well, if a country as wealthy, historically well-managed, and socially conscious as the Netherlands can accidentally break its own society simply by prioritizing real estate equity over wage growth. What happens to the global economy when an entire generation across multiple continents simultaneously realizes the macroeconomic rules of the game are permanently rigged against their labor? We are potentially on the verge of a completely new era of global migration. Historically, mass migration is driven by a search for basic physical safety or escaping famine. But we might be entering an age where highly educated, capable people cross borders, actively shopping for a functioning social contract.
Moving their capital and their labor to whichever nation actually rewards their productivity.
Exactly.
Capital has always been mobile, searching the globe for the highest yield. It is entirely possible we are about to see human labor operate with that exact same ruthless mobility.
It's a fascinating thought.
It really is. Shopping for a social contract like you're shopping for a new bank account completely redefines what makes a country perfect. You can ace the report card on safety and infrastructure, but if you fail the class on upward mobility, your brightest students are still going to drop out.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep examining the blueprints of the systems you live in, keep questioning the mechanics behind the rules, and we'll catch you next time.